All right, good morning and welcome to today's panel discussion, which is the discussion will be about advancing international accountability to end gender apartheid in Afghanistan. My name is Nazila Jamshidi, and I'm a member of Board of Director with the Right to Learn Afghanistan. And it's truly an honor to moderate this very important conversation with exceptional panelists. So we are gathering today at this very, very critical moment, both for Afghanistan women and girls and for the future of international justice and human rights accountability overall. So over the past 5 years, as we all witnessed, the Taliban have institutionalized a system of exclusion, a system of highly controlled that many advocates and legal experts and a lot of lawyers have identified as a gender apartheid. So this is a very critical moment, as I said, but not only for Afghanistan. It's a critical moment for the world to decide whether or not they will allow a regime to systematically and intentionally remove women and girls from public life and without any meaningful accountability to hold them accountable. So today's panel, it's very important conversation, and I'm glad we brought best of best into this room to speak about it. So our panel today will explore the ongoing efforts to recognize and codify gender apartheid as a crime under international law. That's a very important thing. And also, and talk about the campaign in general, a campaign that Afghan women, both inside the country and outside, have significantly contributed to. And we are so grateful for a lot of our international friends who have been alongside us and fighting for this campaign and to bring the progress that this campaign deserves. So today we will discuss the developments related to International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, and United Nations, and also People's Fight, as well as other legal and diplomatic pathway that could advance accountability. So we will also examine some additional tools, and that would be including sanctions, diplomatic pressure, and international advocacy, and also what a stronger and more principled international response could look like potentially. So yes, this conversation matters. It matters a lot. It matters not only because of what is happening in Afghanistan, as I said earlier, but because of what it represents globally. And it's very important. And if the international system fails to respond to such a clear and deliberate structure of gender-based oppression, it sends a dangerous message everywhere, unfortunately. And that is systematic exclusion of women and girls that can happen anywhere and without consequence for those acts. So Right to Learn Afghanistan has been one of the leading organizations advocating for codification of gender apartheid and have generously and also significantly contributed to this campaign. And today's discussion with some of the strongest voices is yet another contribution to this campaign. And I am very honored to join this conversation today. So today we have three distinguished speakers who will bring deep and exceptional expertise in women's rights advocacy, international law, and diplomacy. So with no further ado, I would begin by introducing our first speaker, and I let them to speak because what they say is very important. So first, I'd like to start with our first speaker, who's Yalda Royan, a senior women's rights activist and with extensive experience in development, gender, and human rights. She's a founder of Sisterhood and Solidarity and has been deeply engaged in research, advocacy, and work related to gender-based violence, women's rights in conflict setting, and security challenging that women are facing. Yaldajan, thank you so very much for joining us today. You bring a very, very unique, important perspective to this conversation, both through your lived experience in Afghan society and also through your extensive academic and advocacy work that on gender and human rights. And this is exactly kind of experience we need. So your work has helped shedding light on how system of oppression do not affect all women in the same way, and how gender apartheid intersect with other form of marginalization and discrimination. So to begin our discussion, we would really appreciate, we would like to hear from you and your insight on intersectional impact of gender apartheid in Afghanistan and how these layered realities can affect different group of women and girls. Yaldajan, again, thank you so much for joining us. Floor is yours.
Nazilajan, thank you for having me. Good morning, and thank you to the organizers for bringing us together for this important conversation. It is a privilege to join colleagues and participants from around the world today. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the tragic loss of civilian lives yesterday in Kabul and extend my condolences. So when we speak about Afghanistan today, we are no longer discussing isolated violations of women's rights. What we are witnessing is the deliberate construction of a structure of power built on the systematic exclusion of women and girls. In other words, Afghanistan today represents the most extreme and institutionalized example of gender apartheid in the world. If gender apartheid is tolerated anywhere, it weakens the protection of women's rights everywhere. And that reality raises an urgent question for the international community. How do we prevent and respond when gender apartheid begins to take hold? Not only in Afghanistan, but anywhere women's rights are under threat. To answer the question, we must first understand how gender apartheid is constructed. It does not emerge overnight. It develops step by step through laws, institutions, and enforcement mechanisms designed to remove women from public life. The restrictions against women are enforced through documented decrees issued by Taliban leadership. When women fail to comply, the Taliban punish their male relatives using collective punishment to compel families to control women's behavior and enforce their subordination. This is not only discrimination. It is a mechanism of social control designed to sustain women's exclusion indefinitely. When the state systematically enforces women's segregation and subordination through law, institutions, and social coercion, this moves beyond discrimination and becomes the foundation of gender apartheid. At the same time, the Taliban are embedding these policies within a broader legal framework. For example, in January 2026, the Taliban introduced a new criminal procedure code that institutionalizes discrimination and repression. This code explicitly divides people into different social categories and allows different punishments for the same offense depending on status. It also recognizes the category of slave in legal language, referring repeatedly to slaves and masters within the justice system. Under modern international law, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the Slavery Convention, the recognition of slavery and unequal legal status among human beings is fundamentally incompatible with international human rights norms. Yet in Afghanistan today, such language reflects a worldview in which human dignity is unequal and certain groups exist in permanent subordination. In a system already built on the segregation of women, this legal framework reinforces the idea that women are not equal citizens, but dependents under male authority. This is precisely how apartheid systems operate. For minority communities, including Hazaras, Uzbeks, and Ismaili populations, this creates additional layers of vulnerability. And for women belonging to those communities, discrimination becomes intersectional. A Hazara woman, for example, may face repression not only because she is a woman, but also because she belongs to a community historically targeted for ethnic and religious persecution. My research documenting the experiences of Hazara women under Taliban rule shows that gender oppression intersects with ethnicity and religion to produce compound forms of marginalization. Hazara women have been arrested and detained during Taliban campaigns policing so-called bad hijab, with reports of harassment, abuse, and torture in detention. Hazara communities have also faced forced displacement, confiscation of land and property, and economic coercion, including being forced to pay money to secure the release of detained Hazara women or to reclaim their lands. Restrictions on religious freedom further deepen the vulnerability. Shia communities face discrimination in practicing their faith, and Ismaili Shias have reportedly pressured to convert to Sunni Islam. With every attack on Hazara communities, the number of widows and women-headed households increases, placing additional financial and social burden on women. For Hazara women, these realities intersect. They face gender-based repression, while their communities are subjected to persecution, displacement, and restrictions on religious freedom because of their ethnic and sectarian identity. Understanding gender apartheid in Afghanistan, therefore, requires an international lens, one that recognizes how gender oppression interacts with ethnicity, religion, and political exclusion. Apartheid systems do not merely discriminate, they construct systems of domination that affect entire communities across generations. So, what lessons does Afghanistan offer the international community? First, gender apartheid must be recognized early. Systems of oppression rarely begin with their most extreme manifestations. They often begin with restrictions that appear temporary or culturally specific, limits on education, mobility, or employment. But when such restrictions become institutionalized through law and enforcement mechanisms, they evolve into system of permanent exclusion. So recognizing these early warning signs is essential. Second, international accountability must be strengthened. And third, women's rights are irreplaceable from peace and security. And let me conclude with this, that Afghan women have shown extraordinary courage in resisting this system. Despite arrests, intimidation, and violence, they continue to protest, organize, and advocate for their rights. Their struggle is not only for Afghanistan, it's a struggle for the future of gender equality everywhere. Advancing international accountability to end gender apartheid means ensuring that no authority anywhere can build a system of power on the exclusion of women. And that principle must remain universal. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Eyal Dojan, for grounding us in both lived realities and also intersectional harms of gender apartheid. And which is very, very important. And I am glad I have a couple of friends who are studying on intersectionality of harm, and also, as you say, gender oppression intersect with other identities, including ethnicity, class, and religion. And thank you for sharing your insight. And for the remaining part of the session, we are going to focus on the issue of legal and political, which is a very important part of the campaign, and also accountability mechanism. So our next speaker, I would like to introduce our Dr. Evelina Ohab, a lawyer, human rights defender, and an author. Dr. Ohab is a senior program lawyer with International Bar Association's Human Rights Institute and also co-founder of Coalition for Genocide Response. Her work focuses on justice and accountability for core international crimes, including genocide, conflict-related sexual violence, and crimes affecting women and girls and minority communities. Very, very important works, the kind of work that we need in today's world. So today we would like for you, Dr. Ohab, to provide an update on new development related to International Criminal Court, and also provide us with how universal jurisdiction can serve as an important pathway for advancing justice and accountability through domestic court around the world. So the floor is yours. Over to you, Dr. Ohab. Again, thank you so much for joining us. And over to you. You have up to 15 minutes.
Thank you very, very much, Nazila Jan, for the wonderful introduction and indeed for hosting this important session, side event to the CSW. And I was just last week at the CSW, and it was incredible to meet so many Afghan women as well who continued to fight for the recognition of gender apartheid, for the codification of gender apartheid, but also looking into other avenues for justice and accountability to ensure that women and girls in Afghanistan can see justice and accountability being done. And of course, the Taliban held accountable for the horrific treatment of women and girls in the country. And I was asked to cover the International Criminal Court, but also the principle of universal jurisdiction. And of course, when we talk about those avenues, I will be discussing predominantly our focus on the crime of gender persecution as crimes against humanity rather than gender apartheid. And I will explain it in a moment as well. And of course, currently, as it stands, gender apartheid is still not codified. And for the purposes of the International Criminal Court, of course, the International Criminal Court can look into all international crimes as codified in the Rome Statute. And the Rome Statute includes gender persecution, of course, as one of the crimes against humanity. It includes apartheid, but the definition of apartheid centers around the concept of race. And of course, there are many calls also to reform and to amend the Rome Statute to include gender apartheid. Indeed, the International Bar Association, in its recommendations for reforms of the International Criminal Court back in 2024, included a recommendation to reform the Rome Statute and include the crime of gender apartheid so that then it could, of course, be investigated and prosecuted by the International Criminal Court. I will share the link to this document a little bit later on, but to make sure that all our attendees have access to it as well and can see exactly what the process would involve. So now, in terms of the International Criminal Court, so of course, the International Criminal Court has jurisdiction over the situation in Afghanistan. It has territorial jurisdiction over Afghanistan because Afghanistan is a state party to the Rome Statute, and it has also personal jurisdiction over Afghan citizens. The situation has been looked by the Office of the Prosecutor for some time. And as you all may remember, just before the Taliban took over back in 2020, the Republic of Afghanistan asked the International Criminal Court to stall the investigations and allow courts in Afghanistan to look into the crimes and prosecute the crimes. But then once the Taliban took over, of course, it became clear that no such investigations and prosecutions in Afghanistan would happen. And at that stage, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court called to revive the investigations and work of the International Criminal Court. And indeed, that was done by the pretrial chamber. And from 2022, the pretrial chamber allowed further consideration of the situation in Afghanistan. And when we think about the work done by the International Criminal Court, of course, the International Criminal Court has jurisdiction to look into all international crimes committed in Afghanistan from 2003. And that includes crimes committed by all actors in Afghanistan. And we are talking about hundreds and thousands of possible cases that the International Criminal Court could look into. And it would be difficult for the International Criminal Court to look into all those crimes. And because of that, the Office of the Prosecutor prioritized certain cases. And one of those priorities was indeed the issue of gender persecution. And the Office of the Prosecutor spent a lot of time and resources to identify the crime of gender persecution as one of the priorities and investigate, collect evidence. And indeed, as we know, there are already 2 arrest warrants that have been issued by the International Criminal Court, and they're indeed in relation to gender persecution. That's their priority. When the International Criminal Court announced the 2 arrest warrants, they made it very clear as well that those 2 arrest warrants are public. But it doesn't mean that there are no arrest warrants that have been issued which are not public. And there is a reason for doing that. Whenever the International Criminal Court make some of the arrest warrants public, it is very much to also send a very strong message that yes, we are looking into those crimes. Yes, we will be going after those who stand accused of committing those crimes. So there is value of having such public arrest warrants. But for arrest warrants which are not public, there is another rationale for it, and it is indeed that sometimes the court believes that some of those alleged perpetrators may be traveling to some countries which are state parties to the Rome Statute, and then would have to arrest and send those alleged perpetrators to The Hague. So of course we don't know whether there are any arrest warrants which are not public or how many of them have been issued, and ultimately what it will mean in terms of course, those members of the Taliban traveling to other countries, and especially to state parties to Rome Statute, and then what would have to happen. So that there is a very, of course, strong message there that was made by the International Criminal Court that yes, 2 arrest warrants, but there will be many more. We just don't know. We just don't know about them. They're not in the public domain. And something what is very important to remember about the International Criminal Court, and of course, all eyes are on the International Criminal Court. We wait for the arrest warrants. We wait to see the alleged perpetrators being sent to The Hague. But something what we always need to remember is that the International Criminal Court will go only after a few of those most responsible for the crimes, not after the middlemen, not after the people who are on the bottom of the hierarchy. So of course, there is a great need to ensure that we look into other avenues for justice and accountability. And the International Criminal Court is not the only place that can secure justice and accountability for gender persecution as perpetrated against women and girls in Afghanistan. And indeed, this is, of course, where the principle of universal jurisdiction is so important. The principle of universal jurisdiction enables to investigate and prosecute international crimes using domestic courts. So these domestic courts could be in Germany, or could be in Argentina or the UK. Those courts can prosecute international crimes committed anywhere in the world. Or at least that's the theory. Now, when various states started domesticating the principle of universal jurisdiction, they domesticated them in different ways. So, for example, we have the case of Germany. Germany has something what we refer to as the pure universal jurisdiction. German courts can investigate, prosecute international crimes committed anywhere in the world, even if there is no nexus with Germany. And we've seen an incredible case, that was a case of the Yazidi genocide, where the perpetrator was an Iraqi national. The crimes were committed in Iraq. The victim was also from Iraq. The alleged perpetrator, at the time of issuing arrest warrant, has never been to Germany, but nonetheless, German prosecutors initially structured investigations to look into the crimes and then identify the alleged perpetrator, issued arrest warrant. At the time he was in Greece, Greece sent him to Germany to stand a trial. So that was an incredible case and an incredible example to follow. Then we have the case of Argentina. Again, Argentina has a very again, what we call pure universal jurisdiction. So very broad understanding of the principle, enabling courts in Argentina to prosecute international crimes committed anywhere in the world, again, without a nexus with the country. But again, Germany and Argentina are a few of those cases with such broad understanding of the principle. Other countries don't enable or don't provide for this kind of avenue for justice and accountability. And I'll very briefly explain you the example of the UK. In the UK, you have a mixture of different universal jurisdiction regimes. We have pure universal jurisdiction for cases of torture or for violations of the Geneva Convention, so all the understanding of war crimes. But if it comes to the crimes, international crimes as defined in the Rome Statute, we have a limited universal jurisdiction, or actually it's not even universal jurisdiction, it's only extraterritorial jurisdiction, which means that if the crimes were committed outside of the UK, British courts can prosecute them only if they were committed by British citizens or residents. And this is something what we have been challenging here in the UK. We had an amendment to the Crime and Policing Bill that is now before the House of Lords in the UK. And it was to remove the requirement for the alleged perpetrator to be a British citizen or resident. So that if one of the Taliban members comes to the UK and is accused of international crimes such as gender persecution, he could be investigated and prosecuted in the UK. And we were proceeding with this amendment. It had incredible support from civil society organizations, from experts, from many parliamentarians. But unfortunately for now, the governing party did not provide the support that is needed for this amendment to proceed. So unfortunately, the process is stalled, and we'll be waiting for better political situation, better leadership to enable us to proceed with it. So without this amendment, and this is the current situation, that if the Taliban come to the UK, they cannot be prosecuted for genocide, for crimes against humanity, for war crimes as defined in the Rome Statute. They still could be prosecuted for torture and for violations of the Geneva Conventions, but that limits our options in terms of prosecuting gender persecution in the UK. In terms of gender apartheid, something what we want to do here in the UK, and we are hoping to do it once the new session of Parliament will start, is to bring forward a private members' bill. So in both houses, at the very beginning of the parliamentary session, parliamentarians can bring and can table private members' bills. And this is to introduce a proposal that, for example, the government would normally not propose. And indeed, a couple of years ago, when the current session started, Brendan O'Hara MP wanted to table a private members' bill proposing to codify the crime of gender apartheid in the UK law, without waiting for the Rome Statute to change, without waiting for the Crimes Against Humanity Treaty to be adopted. He wanted to bring this bill to ensure that our domestic law could show the way for other nations as well, and to start codifying gender apartheid on the national level. Great initiative, but at the time it was not picked one of the first 20 bills. Normally, during each session, Parliament picks 20 bills that will be looked into, 20 private members' bills. And it's a matter of chance rather than any kind of any other consideration. More or less, we put bills into a hat, and then 20 of them are taken out of the hat blindly. And we were just not lucky to at that time, but we'll try it again once the new session starts, and it should start, I believe, around May time. So we'll try to table it again in both houses and then see whether we'll be more lucky. And of course, if this private members' bill is picked as one of the 20 bills, then we'll be given time in Parliament to debate the issue and to ensure that the bill goes through the parliamentary process and ensuring codification on the domestic level of the crime of gender apartheid. And I think I covered both the ICC, the universal jurisdiction, and also a little bit about the private members' bill. And I will stop here, but if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Well, thank you so very much, Dr. Ohab, for helping us, first of all, understand what is there, what kind of sources are there to help, and also what's the limitation and gaps over there. Because as you say, the international court can look at the crime that are codified. And also, there are some resources over there, like this private bill through the UK Parliament, as you just talked about it, and can just introduce that or brought the idea about. That's very, very important. And I hope you keep this conversation with our advocate for codification of gender apartheid, Afghan advocate, and just provide all this information in different platform with our women, because they are working so very hard for codification of this crime. So, and by that, let me move to our final speaker today, who's Annie Borzheimer, a U.S. Department of State career diplomat and with the rank of Minister Counselor. She served as acting Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Afghanistan and as a Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in Kabul for some years, among many other diplomatic roles that she has served. She also previously served in Afghanistan in different careers before, and that's why she has very extensive knowledge and expertise over Afghanistan issues. And today, in addition to being a professor for international relations, she's a very respected human rights advocate and foreign policy commentator. And she's a great friend of Afghans, those Afghans who want a democratic and peaceful Afghanistan. So before I move to Annie, I have this message for our audience, because I just saw one of the audience raise hand. Please feel free to leave your question in the chat. We have a Q&A session at the end of the program, and we make sure to respond to your all questions. So, and back to our speaker, Annie. Today, Annie will speak about international and diplomatic dimension of accountability and also prevention. And that includes the role of sanction, the weakness of current system, what is the challenge of the current system, and how the international community can strengthen a principled approach toward Afghanistan. Annie, once again, thank you so much for joining us today, and floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I join other speakers in appreciating this session, and also in expressing condolences for the loss of lives, that has been going on in fighting in Kabul, in other countries. It is a terrible time, but it is a time where we have to do even more to promote the idea of peace. So I want to give sort of three ideas about the international and diplomatic angles for gender apartheid and accountability. The first is the importance of persistence, clarity, and the all tools approach. In other words, I think it's important to be as relentless as the enemy, as the other side, and to use the right international formats to get our messages across. With respect to human rights, we've heard some really important input. Diplomatically speaking, the most important formats for human rights conversations can be the Human Rights Commission that is focused in Geneva, the UN General Assembly, and then some key international groupings like the European Union. At the Human Rights Commission in the end of February, Volker Turk, who's the Commissioner for Human Rights, gave a really important rundown of ways in which the international community should put pressure on the de facto authorities to meet the international human rights obligations that apply to Afghanistan. And he stressed the point of accountability. And in one speech, he gave 6 examples of the tools that are important to be used, and some of which we've talked about already. And I just want to run through those because this is only one speech. We can think of other methods. In his speech, he talked about the International Criminal Court and the importance of the arrest warrants. He talked about the independent investigative mechanism that was established by the Human Rights Commission, which is in need of financial support. He talked about the case at the International Court of Justice that was initiated a year ago on the grounds that the de facto authorities, the Taliban, are violating Afghanistan's obligations under the CEDAW Convention. He talked about the importance of states investigating and prosecuting violations of international law committed by their forces during decades of conflict in Afghanistan. He urged the codification of gender apartheid in the proposed treaty for the prevention and punishment of crimes against humanity. And he spoke about the Doha process, a political process, and said that any state that is engaged in the Doha process should be ensuring that human rights is at the center of any form of engagement with the Taliban. So there are other examples, as I said, but all tools everywhere that we can think of. There is nothing that we should not be using. We should be persistent. We should be clear. And in terms of clarity, I think it is very important to think about narrative clarity when working with the international community. The attention span is short. People do not always remember the details of every event or conflict. And so it's very important to focus international attention on exactly why they should act, and also what exactly do you want them to do. My second point is that sanctions are a very imperfect but necessary human rights tool. So individual nations may have human rights sanctions of different degrees. And unfortunately, those sanctions may have very little impact in terms of changing the behavior of the Taliban. One drawback can be that a sanction regime by a single country might be termed as Western. It may be denigrated as something that is only one part of the world that cares about an issue. United Nations sanctions, while difficult to achieve, at least have the virtue of speaking for the whole world. But the advantage of sanctions, even by a single country, are the signal that they can send to the people who are suffering and to other nations who look at what they're doing and realize that they should do it as well. It is a signal for accountability, and it is a signal against impunity. And if you do not have sanctions, unfortunately, that is a signal that the issue is not of importance. So the sanctions at the United Nations against the Taliban are not on human rights grounds. The sanctions that people speak about sometimes are mostly the ones that we know of as terrorism-related sanctions. It's also known by its regime number. It's the Security Council Resolution 1988. They apply in Afghanistan's case to the regime's terrorism against the previous government, and also to the fact that the country is under the Taliban is hosting terrorist groups who threaten the region and the world. The sanctions against the Taliban at the UN only list about 135 specific names or groups. It is not against the country, and it's not against the whole Taliban regime. The sanctions are also limited in what they apply to. They are a travel ban, they are an arms embargo, and they are a freeze on assets. Again, they are personalized and do not apply to the whole country. So it is unfortunately possible that the sanctions could be lifted even with the terrible human rights regime that is in place. You have had at various points countries such as China and Russia speak about the need to lift the sanctions or lighten them or give a permanent waiver to the travel ban which is truly the only part of the sanctions that the Taliban leadership seems to care about. So at this point, the travel ban still applies, but the Chinese have said that they would like that ban to be lifted. If I could use the example of South Africa, which is another one of my own diplomatic postings and an important country to consider in the conversation about apartheid. In the 1970s and 80s, there were a variety of sanctions, and you need a variety in order to make the impact that you're looking for. There were economic and tourist and arms sanctions. There was a sports embargo against South Africa. And of course, South Africa lost its seat at the United Nations. It's important to note that that is the only other case of a country not being allowed to sit at the United Nations was on the grounds of its apartheid regime. And fortunately, for the moment, the Taliban does not have Afghanistan's seat in New York. So my third point is, if you're putting this together in terms of what we all want, we want international support for a political process that will bring this situation to an end, where Afghanistan citizens have their rights and they have a representative government. So the end game of using violence, unfortunately, we have seen in Afghanistan's case, we've seen in other cases, there can be a civil war that ensues. The end game in South Africa was that the regime recognized that it lacked legitimacy, it had no economic staying power, and through years of negotiation, it left office and it did not create a civil war. What we really want to see is a political process that will highlight Afghanistan voices against Taliban rule and keep the Taliban from being normalized or recognized. I think that the tools available are the Security Council, which should be supporting an effort towards political dialogue. The UN General Assembly and Human Rights Commission, which are supporting the issue of the values, the human rights problems, the lack of accountability, and all of the other tools that we've spoken about. The sanctions against terrorism should be kept in place because they still apply and they still are a form of pressure. And of course, the Taliban should not be allowed to take Afghanistan's seat at the United Nations. I would just end by saying that it's very important when we look at all of the different tools, and I know there's a wide diversity of Afghanistan voices, is to try to coordinate our messages very well, to remember that the international community has something of a short attention span. They need to have specific requests. I think the gender apartheid campaign is one amazing example of message coordination and effectiveness. So we certainly want there to be an end game in Afghanistan that moves us away from needing to talk about gender apartheid and the daily atrocities that people face in the country. There has to be a better future that we're working towards. Thank you.
Annie, thank you so very much for such an important tools that you just talk about, 6 tools that international community can utilize to support the situation of Afghans inside the country, and I truly appreciate you calling for the support of international community to start this political process that highlights Afghan voices against Taliban rules, and providing all the tools that are available to make that happen. I truly appreciate that. We will definitely get back to you on this with some questions, and I'm sure our audience will have some questions for you. But well, all 3 panelists, thank you so much for such an insightful and powerful remarks. We talked about, you guys talked about intersectional realities of gender apartheid, which is very important to understand in this campaign, and also current state of international legal effort and diplomatic and policy tools that you, Annie, clearly and beautifully explain that can help to advance this accountability and hold Taliban rules accountable for that. For the remaining of our session, I would like to open the discussion and explore some connection between legal, political, and human dimensions. But before I pose some of the questions that I have, I would like to take some of the questions in the chat by our audience, because it's very important for us to provide a response to our audience's questions. So there is a question for you, Dr. Ohab, by Hamid Yazdan Panah. So it says, I'm just reading it. It says, you mentioned the ICC will only go after the most responsible for gender persecution in Afghanistan. How can the principle of universal jurisdiction, as seen in countries like Germany, be used to fill the accountability gap and ensure that mid-level perpetrators and enforcers are also brought to justice? So you can respond to that. There is another question posed to you, but let's start with this one with Hamid Yazdan Panah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nazila Jan. This is indeed a great question, and it goes to the issue: how do we trigger cases under the principle of universal jurisdiction? And again, in each country, it works differently. But just very briefly on the situation in Germany and how one can initiate cases under the principle of universal jurisdiction in Germany. Germany has something what is called structural investigations. Structural investigations are investigations issued by the prosecutor in Germany, which look into the patterns of the crimes, not into individuals and their involvement in the crimes. So the first step is very much to look into, and in the case of Afghanistan, that would be looking into what kind of evidence there is on the issue of gender persecution, what are the manifestations of gender persecution in Afghanistan, and then working from there and trying to identify some those responsible for the crimes. And then, of course, if there is evidence against individuals, that's where the prosecutor could issue arrest warrants. Something, again, that exists under the German law is the duty to prosecute if you have evidence. So, for example, if individuals who are arriving in Germany testify about the horrific treatment of women and girls in Afghanistan, what they experience, that could help the prosecutor to also look into the issue of gender persecution in Afghanistan and initiate structural investigations. And indeed, we know of a number of Afghan women who were resettled to Germany, and they got asylum in Germany, and it would be key very much to work with them and ensure that the information that they have about gender persecution in Afghanistan was also recorded by the prosecutor's office. And there is a number of incredible organizations who have been working with victims and survivors of international crimes who brought proceedings in in Germany. There's, of course, an option to file cases with the prosecutor's office in Germany, and that's when you already have information about those most responsible, or well, those responsible for the crimes, who potentially could be in Germany or could be traveling to Germany. So that could also, this is yet another way of engaging the prosecutor. And I will give you maybe two examples. I already mentioned to you the example of the Yazidi genocide and how the prosecutor initiates structural investigations. Another example will be of the atrocities in Syria. And that was when the Syrian regime was still in power. As hundreds and thousands of Syrians were traveling to Germany. That was when Angela Merkel opened Germany to refugees from Syria. Once the refugees started arriving in Germany, and they were telling their stories, because of course for the process of asylum claim, you have to tell this, your story. You have to say what kind of horrific atrocities you've been subjected to. That's where the evidence was being collected, that it was impossible for the prosecutor to just ignore it. And again, because of the duty to investigate, if there is evidence, that ultimately triggered further steps in the whole process. And indeed, the prosecutor opened structural investigations and then started identifying some of those responsible. And then I will tell you one more case, which was more direct case of law firms working with victim survivors and then filing cases. And there was one I know that there was a wonderful law firm from New York who has been working with victim survivors of the horrific atrocities in Eritrea and Ethiopia. And they also filed a case in Germany. We still don't know whether it's going to proceed, but nonetheless, the consideration of the case is ongoing. So I think the two options there would be to ensure that the women who are already in Germany testify, approach the prosecutor's office, tell their stories, anything that they've been subjected to, but also for civil society organizations to also work with lawyers and also file potential cases with the prosecutor's office and take it from there. For now, I haven't heard of structural investigations into the issue of gender persecution in Germany, but definitely that would be a very important case to look into. And considering that Germany has this incredible system and the pure universal jurisdiction, Germany is one of those countries where it would be much easier to engage the prosecutor on the issue than anywhere else in the world. Another would be definitely Argentina, and again, engaging lawyers in Argentina to consider filing the case in relation to gender persecution in Afghanistan. And if anyone is interested in that, we can also try to share some further information.
Beautiful. Thank you so very much. So there is another question. I'm going to take another question from the chat from our audiences, but I would like to invite other audiences. If you have any question, please feel free to leave it in the chat, and we make sure to take as many questions as we can throughout our conversation. So Yaldajan, I think the next question, you are such a bright person to provide some perspective on that. I understand you talked about some action points that international community and an institution can take to support the campaign and also the situation of Afghan women. But there is a question, I'm going to read it by our audience. I would like for you to provide some insight. So the question says, do you think what have been done by the international community towards addressing gender apartheid in Afghanistan is sufficient? I think the women in the country has been totally forgotten. Even the education and humanitarian funds are cut off. Thousands of girls are out of school. What kind of assistance is this? Would you like to provide some insight?
Yeah, I just want to say quickly and short that recognition of gender apartheid, I'm not a technical or legal person. Annie and Dr. Ohab would be the right people to talk about it, but recognition of gender apartheid is not something that will happen in a month or two or in a year even. So the efforts that we as Afghan women's rights activists are doing have at least raised the voices inside, for example, human rights, UN Human Rights Commission, not sorry, Council, and Richard Bennett has talked about gender apartheid, and some other countries have been talking about gender apartheid, which was not something familiar like 2 years ago, and this is the result of what we have been doing. In terms of women being forgotten, I'm really sorry that you have this feeling. We all have this feeling actually, but we use every opportunity to talk about the situation of Afghan women and raise the international community's attention towards the women of Afghanistan. And I think that's only what I can say, Nazila Jan. And I understand the hopelessness, the helplessness, and that's frustrating. And I have been there. I am there every day. And I hope there is a day that we don't have to face this anymore.
Thank you, Yelda. I totally understand, and I echo your voice and other Afghan women who feel being forgotten. I hear a lot from Afghan women who feel very much betrayed. So on the technical part, I would like to ask Dr. Ohab to provide some information on the technical part of gender apartheid, what have been done, what it was sufficient and what can be done.
Thank you very much. Of course, I think it is very important to recognize that in this conversation today, we are talking about some of the legal avenues for justice and accountability, and including codification of gender apartheid, of course, but also looking into gender persecution and pursuing all tools in the toolbox that are available at this stage. Of course, codification of gender apartheid is going to take a very long time. So, for example, when we talk about codification in the Crimes Against Humanity Treaty, this is going to take a few years. We are talking between 5-10 years, depends how the conversations are going to proceed. And at this stage, of course, we don't know whether gender apartheid will be included in the treaty. But that's the reason it is so important to look into other avenues for justice and accountability, and also other avenues to codify gender apartheid. And I mentioned to you changes the Rome Statute, and I mentioned the recommendation to amend the Rome Statute to include gender apartheid. And again, this would take a few years. For this, we need supermajority for this to proceed. And again, it's very difficult to get this kind of support. You could think of the recommendation and the amendment to add the crime of ecocide to the Rome Statute. And again, it's been several years. We are getting very much closer to this reform, but nonetheless, it's been several years, a lot of advocacy, a lot of work. If we were to proceed with the private members bill, if we are successful in getting out of the so-called hut, this could take some years as well, much shorter process than, for example, with the Rome Statute or the Crimes Against Humanity, but that would be one country only. A small step, of course, other countries could follow the same route, but nonetheless, that's a very, very long process. And we need to recognize that. And there is much more that needs to happen to ensure that we support women in Afghanistan. And again, aside of the legal avenues for justice and accountability, there are other ways how we could engage and put pressure on the Taliban to ensure that, as Annie mentioned, we don't normalize the relationship. And again, there should be no normalization if women and girls are confined to their homes, have no rights. So we need to look outside of the legal avenues for justice and accountability, very important as they are, and justice and accountability could also prevent future crimes, future atrocities. But again, that's a very long process, and we need to look into everything what is available out there, all tools in the toolbox approach.
Well, thank you so much. So before I get some more questions from the chat, Annie, I would like to get back to you because you talked about a lot of very clear tools that can be used to resolve the situation a little bit. And I'm glad still the international community is equipped with good tools that can be utilized. But among them, I mean, you talked about sanction and some diplomatic pressures, which is great. And I hear a lot from people talking about sanction and diplomatic pressure. But I would like I would like for you to talk about what roles can these sanctions, these diplomatic pressure realistically play kind of in advancing the accountability while avoiding normalization of the Taliban's policies toward women and girls, because there is huge concern over any engagement which lead to normalization of these Taliban's policy toward women and girls. Over to you, Annie.
Well, thank you very much. I think we all are kind of coming to a little bit of the same point, which is that the legal tools are absolutely essential. They are slow moving, but they create a framework, a norm, a clear message from the international community of what is unacceptable. And I think we all maybe agree that they serve as a tool that should be used in other ways as well. So you don't wait for the Crimes Against Humanity Treaty to be negotiated and passed before you make use of the messaging of gender apartheid. And so whether or not it's already in a treaty somewhere, the point is that it's a powerful message of a political nature all by itself and right now. And it is used in order to push back on the normalization of the Taliban's regime. The arguments that are made in some cases, countries or individuals who say that the Taliban is behaving in a culturally appropriate way, for example, needs to be pushed back. And that's what's happening with this campaign and with the other tools of accountability. So I think that sanctions, pressure, messaging, it's all pushing towards something. The something, though, is for me not about what the international community has to say, but what do Afghans themselves have to say? What is the political process they want to see? What is the future that they want for themselves? And nobody except a person in the country can decide what that country's constitution should look like, or what their daily lives should look like. So we in the international community, I think of it as kind of trying to hold a door open. And if the door is closed, if there's recognition of the Taliban, then the women who feel forgotten will be even further away from what they need. But if we can help keep that door open for Afghanistan's people to walk through and to negotiate their own future, that to me is the point of sanctions, pressure, and all of these campaigns.
Yeah, totally. Thank you, Annie. So I see a question in the chat, and which is very much connected to your point, which says, and the question is by Parwana Rahmani, which says some of the countries are actually supporting the de facto, and how it can be resolved, and if there is any unity among the international communities.
It's really complicated, and I don't have a single or simple answer, but I do think that one part of the answer is offering an alternative. That the Taliban at this point have a lot of physical control in the country. They have control over Afghanistan's resources. That's why in some cases you find countries, especially Afghanistan's neighbors, who have decided to work with them. I think an alternative voice is essential. And that legitimate alternative voice who says, we stand for human rights, we also stand for stability. The Taliban is inherently unstable. They are allowing 24 terrorist groups to sit inside Afghanistan. There was bombing last night. Why? Because the Taliban are deciding to make a priority of hosting terrorist groups rather than the safety of the people. And so they are an unstable force for the region. And the alternative has to say, look, we stand for legitimacy and we stand for stability. and you should be talking to us and not talking to them.
Oh, thank you. Awesome. Dr. Ohab, would you like to also provide some insight regarding the issue of human rights and, I mean, back to gender apartheid for this question? Yes, everyone says, I mean, we have been in a United Nations building several times. We have seen responses. We have seen, like, words of support, but not in a unified, uniform way. Would you like to provide some insight in here?
Yes, I wanted to mention to you one example, and also why it is so important to also look into the avenues under the principle of universal jurisdiction. And the case is again of Germany. And we've been hearing that Germany not necessarily is maybe supporting the de facto authorities, but started conversation with the de facto authorities and even invited some of them to come to Germany to have a conversation. And we've been hearing about it since last year. I don't know whether that meeting happened. But something very important for us to remember is that the prosecutor's office in Germany is independent from the government. So the government may want to have a conversation with some of the Taliban, may want to invite them to Germany, but the prosecutor, if the prosecutor has enough evidence to look into some of those Taliban members who the government is having conversation with, could potentially issue an arrest warrant. And again, a lot would have to happen in terms of collection of the evidence, engaging the prosecutors. But again, because Germany has this very pure model of universal jurisdiction, and there is no need for nexus, but as long as the prosecutor has evidence of the crimes, is obliged to investigate. It is so key to make the most of this avenue for justice and accountability, and then take it from there. And we've been hearing, of course, of other countries engaging with the Taliban and others who are not supporting the Taliban need to be more vocal. Whenever parliamentarians here in the UK ask questions to the government, the UK government, of course, the UK government says we are not supportive of the de facto authorities in Afghanistan. But is the UK doing enough to address the situation? Whenever we ask how much of the foreign aid is supporting Afghan women in Afghanistan, the usual response we receive from the government is that the government is sending X amount of money to Afghanistan as humanitarian aid, and they make it clear that half of it should go to Afghan women. But is the UK government overseeing it? What if that money is actually not reaching the Afghan women in need? What are the accountability mechanisms for that? Is the UK government going to stop it? Of course not. There is, at this stage, we don't have this kind of model of overseeing how the money is being used, whether it's benefiting Afghan women, how it's supporting them in the country. So this is something that will need to be addressed as well, and we need to learn from some of the abuses of the current process to make sure that we have better approaches to supporting Afghan women and ensuring that actually the assistance that is being sent to Afghanistan is reaching Afghan women in need.
Certainly. Well, thank you so much. I have this audience, Rojakia, who's sending condolences for the tragic attack in Kabul yesterday, and also is asking a question, like bringing the South Africa example as an very relevant and interesting kind of example. And she's asking how this potentially can help with the regime change in our region. So I think Annie, you would like to take this question.
I apologize if there's noise out there. With respect to the South Africa example, is the question how it would lead to regime change in Afghanistan?
Yes, I believe.
Nothing is simple, but I would say that one of the most important, well, several important features of what happened in South Africa. One was that there was a very consistent opposition voice. Secondly, that there were people who were demonstrating inside the country. They had more freedoms than in Afghanistan. Third, there was an international campaign and boycott of the country And fourth, there was a sort of international disgust with the racial apartheid that had a lot of power within the United Nations. So after a while, the economic problems and the international, with the fact that the government didn't have legitimacy, those were the two reasons that the government decided to embark on a political discussion with the opposition. You're on mute, Nazila. Done.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Annie. And well, I truly hope that someday we can have another discussion specifically on these tools and bring a lot of Afghan advocates from different backgrounds to talk about it and respond all the questions they have. But Yaldajan, I would like to get back to you regarding your insight over the intersectionality and Afghan women's advocacy, which you are highly engaged. I would like to ask you, how can we, as Afghan women advocate, can help global community to understand the situation a little bit better? I understand we complain about their action, they complain about lack of understanding of the reality and situation and what exactly Afghan women want from them to do. So what do you think about it, Yaldajan? You are engaged in a lot of advocacy work and you talk with a lot of policymakers and leaders.
Thank you, Nazila. Before I go to your question, I see one question in the chat box from Joanne, I guess, who says, is there international groups or individuals presently in Afghanistan who are tackling these gender apartheid? And then I saw two other questions from two other participants who are relevant to this, like how to create the space for women from inside Afghanistan to take part in these advocacy. From my own experience and my daily work with the women protesters inside Afghanistan, yes, Joanne, there are groups of women who have been resisting the Taliban's oppression from day one, like from August 16th of 2021, at the very high price that they have paid by being detained, by being tortured, and so many other punishments that they have gone through. But women have been resisting, and it's not only the external international channels that are working. To respond to the other question, how to bring women, every time I come to an event, just like today, I talk to women protesters inside Afghanistan and I ask them, what do they want me to convey? What is their message to the international community? And then I hear from them and bring that. If there are chances for them to speak, I give them the chance. But then if there is not possibility, then I consult them. That's how we keep those women involved in the discussion. And how to keep the international community aware of what's going on. We have been doing everything possible, Nazila, you are a witness of that. We are writing about what is happening in Afghanistan. We are speaking about what's happening in Afghanistan. We share stories from inside Afghanistan, and we keep the agenda of Afghan women on the table as much as we can. Yes, international community has been neglecting it, but as advocates, we never will give up on hope. We will one day, as Nazila said, there will be a discussion that we will say how Afghan women struggled to codify gender apartheid and to get gender apartheid recognized, and how the women in Afghanistan are now being the experts of this process. So, yeah, Nazila, that's my answer. I hope I was able to respond.
You definitely did. Thank you so much. And here we have one of our audiences asking if they can connect with our speakers, definitely, yes, you can. You can find their social media handles in our banners, in the website, and flyers. So definitely you can connect with them, and you are welcome to do so. And before we conclude our discussion, there is one more question for Annie by Hamidi Aslan Panah. Annie, I'm reading the question. So it's from international policy standpoint, what more can government and multilateral and institution do to move beyond a statement and symbolic action and instead adopt concrete, coordinated measure such as sanction and diplomatic pressure that can meaningfully impact the situation of women in Afghanistan? Over to you.
Thank you. Well, I go with the most difficult thing first, which is that there needs to be a political process that will end this regime and begin a government and society in Afghanistan where women are their own advocates and are no longer under gender apartheid. Getting to this requires people to, first of all, say this is what they want to. And every once in a while, I find it to be, there's too much emphasis on what the international community would be doing for the people of Afghanistan. I think what we want to keep saying that we're doing is that we're going to try to establish a situation in which Afghan people are speaking for themselves. And one of the ways that this might happen is through the UN Security Council, which is going to reconsider the mission in Afghanistan that represents the Security Council. And there have been efforts by the Security Council in the past to think about what is the future, what is the way to make Afghanistan a just and stable and a good place for its own people and for the region and for the world. And so if the UN starts with the Security Council to support a political process, that's a major step forward. At the same time, all the other locations, right, all the other areas have to say the same thing over and over that they're saying now, which is that there must be accountability, that Afghanistan's de facto leaders must obey international human rights law and the will of their own people. And every single opportunity at the Human Rights Council, in the General Assembly, in not just the EU, but also the Shanghai Cooperation Organization representing China and Central Asia, in all kinds of regional bodies, this has to be the same message strongly delivered.
Absolutely. Thank you, Annie. And since we are doing very well with time, I would like to take another question, which is for Dr. Ohab, I believe. So the question is, why is the process of picking private member bills random? Is there any intentional reason behind this?
Hello, I started typing it as well online, but happy to discuss it. It's all about it's the blind process. So it's to ensure fairness. During each session, at the beginning of each session, some hundreds of bills are put into that hat, and only around 20 of them will be picked. And this is because there is very limited time that's in Parliament for this kind of bills. Among many other government bills, debates, and everything else that is happening. And doesn't matter who you are, which party you are from, or what the bill is about. All bills are treated the same. So they're all put into the same hat and then picked. 20 of them are picked. And this happens in both houses. The process slightly differs in both houses, but nonetheless, it's again to ensure fairness and so that we don't... The bills that are picked are not from, I don't know, governing party or very famous parliamentarians. All of them are treated the same way.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much. And I see a lot of other questions in the chat by our audiences, and I wish we could take all of them, but still we are doing very well with the time. So I'd like to take another question, which I believe should be for Annie and also Yelda John. Both of you can provide insight on that. It says, how can international accountability mechanism address not just violation, but the structural condition that allow the gender apartheid to be reinstated? Oh, they are moving, so I just, particularly where women's rights become entangled with foreign intervention narratives.
Yeah, and it's a powerful question. And at the Commission for the Status of Women, there were a lot of people talking about, the pushback on women's rights using all kinds of narratives, that they are foreign or Western or colonial or something that is not inherently part of that country's, say, culture or tradition. And all of that has an agenda of basically reinforcing some patriarchal norms and also reinforcing the idea that women are not full citizens. And I think that this is a worldwide problem, but in Afghanistan's case, people have really tried for, of course, many years to at least make it extremely clear that any narrative that this gender apartheid is part of Islam is wrong, and that many, people of different varieties in the OIC or who are Afghan leaders themselves have pushed back on that narrative. They've pushed back on its culture narrative. And all I can say is that it's part of a seamless whole, that everyone's rights are under attack. And this is often one of the areas that people use in order to attack other rights, is they start with women's rights and they move on to rights of free speech, etc. So I think setting the scene for gender apartheid, pushback early, as one of the other speakers mentioned, long before it's instituted, that is essential.
Awesome, thank you. Yalda John, would you like to add anything to this? All right, I think Yalda is a little bit disconnected. Well, I see a high engagement here in the chat, which is great. I always enjoy such a high engagement between panelists and audiences about the topic. Well, everyone, okay, so I think now it's time to come to the end of our discussion today, and I would like to truly thank our distinguished panelists, our audiences, for asking very, very difficult questions. I would expect all those difficult questions for our panelists, and you got such right people to provide information and insight toward those questions that you have. So again, Yelda, Royan, Dr. Ohab, and Annie, thank you for sharing your expertise, your insight, and commitment to advancing justice and accountability toward Afghan women and the situation in Afghanistan. So today's conversation has made clear that what is happening in Afghanistan is not just like a devastating reality for Afghan women and girls, as it has been throughout the history, but also a defining challenge for international system, both international court and other international mechanisms that we have in place. So we have here that accountability requires more than condemnation, as some of our audiences in the chat also mentioned. It requires legal innovation, political courage, and coordinated diplomacy, and a lot of sustained advocacy, just like Yalda talked about it. So we also need all of this with Afghan-led voices and leadership in place, and gratefully we have, at least from a woman's side. So the path ahead of us will require a lot of persistence, coalition building, and continued advocacy from government, legal experts, civil society, and international community. And most importantly, from Afghan women themselves. So thank you, everyone who joined us today. We hope this discussion contribute to building a stronger global momentum to advance accountability and also end gender apartheid in Afghanistan. And by that, thank you so much for being with us today, and everyone have a good day.